All right. Hi, everyone. How's everyone doing today? There we go. Okay, I'm going to ask again. How's everybody doing today? One more time. How's everybody doing today? There we go. That's getting better. Are you guys ready to talk about some robotics or what? There we go. Fantastic. Well, thank you all for joining. My name is Omar. I'm Khateeb. I'm the founder and CEO of Khateeb & Co., a company that focuses on helping medtech startups attract investors and grow sales pipeline at scale using social media. I have a fantastic panel of wonderful robotic innovators and CEOs. And so rather than me spending the time introducing them, I'm going to have them each introduce themselves. And the best part is we all agreed one to three sentences at max. We're not reading any CVs. So let me start off with my good friend and colleague, Christopher Prentice.
Yeah, I'm Christopher Prentice. I'm CEO of Harmonic Bionics. We're an upper extremity robotic system for rehab and assessment of the shoulder.
Good afternoon. I'm Bruce Lichorowic. I'm the CEO of Galen Robotics. We're an affiliate of Johns Hopkins University, so our robot came out of Hopkins, and we are focused on ENT, spine, neuro, and cardiac.
Hi, I'm Addie Harris. I'm the CEO of Haventure, which is an accelerator but also an umbrella company to about 15 companies in the robotics and digital space. And prior to that, I was at J&J and did all of the R&D and then commercialized the Velis robotics system, so a long time in the robotics space.
Hi everyone, I'm Stuart Simpson. I'm the CEO of Think Surgical, which is an orthopedic, robotic, and digital surgery company. Prior to that, I led Stryker's joint replacement orthopedic business globally and took them into the robotic space in 2013 with the acquisition of Mako Surgical Corporation.
I'm Greg Fischer. I've been in the image-guided surgical space for about 20 years since I did my PhD on enabling technologies in MRI-guided interventions back at Johns Hopkins. I'm the founder and CEO of AIM Medical Robotics, and our focus is putting robots inside MRI scanners so we can use real-time imaging to guarantee that you actually perform the procedures the way you wanted to. And I've been in academia, so we've had about 15 years, about $15 million of NIH support that's really poured into the development efforts that we've been working on.
I love it. See, that panel did a better job with one intro than like most people in this conference, but that's okay. So before we talk about the future of surgery, we kind of get some context around where we are today and how to get better. So Chris, I want to kick it off to you. When we think about the continuum of care, a lot of companies, at least in the robotics world, start off focusing around one area or one killer app. Can you talk about the importance of focusing on the full continuum of care and how companies should be thinking about that?
Sure, yeah. So I'll reflect on my experience. So prior to Harmonic, I was with Mazor Robotics, which is a spine robot. Prior to that, it was with Intuitive Surgical, the Da Vinci surgical system. So when you look at the continuum of care, the genesis of a lot of the robotic interventions that have happened, and of course Intuitive being the biggest one, it's been a tactical response. It was something that was needed in the OR itself, coming up with solutions for arduous tasks. In the case of a lot of surgical approaches, the arduous task was visualization. You were looking at a 2D element when you should be looking at a 3D. So that's one thing that Da Vinci delivered. And then also maneuverability. Prior, you had laparoscopy, but you had to learn a whole new way of movement in order to get things done than your natural movement. So that's what it brought. So it was a really good approach to fixing those two key problems in the room, and it's opened up a full field. But as you talk about the continuum of care, that's okay. You were already doing a case. Why were you doing the case? It didn't matter. You were doing the case. So you start getting into more of the orthopedic systems like Mako and Mazor, and you're actually able to do a pre-plan. So now you're upstream from the actual intervention. So from a continuum of care, you're starting to figure out what you should be doing and why are you doing it. So that's one way to impact there. So you'll see that, and then on our from a harmonic standpoint, we're looking at after the intervention as well. Let's say you do whatever company you are, you have a perfect implant in the shoulder, you have a perfect system, the surgeon does it perfectly, but there is a whole host of things that happen afterward that affect the quality, and to go back to that. So don't waste that intervention without controlling that aspect after. So, when I look at it, I look at it from a process standpoint. You have your inputs, you have your process, you have your outputs, and you need to enter into all of those to make sure you have high quality across the continuum.
Fantastic. And Chris actually did a fantastic job talking through a baby crying. That was my son, so apologies. He is an investment banker. He's going to be writing some checks later. Addie, I want to go to you for a moment. You have a fantastic experience across a variety of different robotic companies. A lot of investors always have this statement of like, "What's your killer app?" Right? They want to know about a killer app because they see billions of dollars of an opportunity there. The problem is that it's no longer 2002, and hospitals see that as a really expensive one-trick pony. So how do you think about robotics innovating in the future in terms of going on beyond just like one clinical application?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, great question. And, really big kudos to Stuart when he was at Mako, at Intuitive as well, as they figured out how to get robots into hospitals and make them really be known for, yes, they do improve medicine. And the real proof there is that patients want robots to do their surgeries because they feel like there's a better outcome. But we've evolved over 20 plus years, and hospitals are looking at these investments and they say, hey, we can't buy a new robot for each killer app. The same way, you're not going to buy a new phone, you're not going to buy a new computer just for that one app. It has that on it. And we have to start looking at robots, I think, in the same sort of way. It also doesn't make sense for the really big companies. It doesn't matter if they're a company as big as Johnson & Johnson, or I think Intuitive has done a great job with it, where they're taking on many, many different indications. They're looking at clinically, where is their clinical need where a procedure is either difficult to access, a space is difficult to access, or a certain procedure is really difficult for a surgeon to do. So by adding that addition of the robot, that addition of the surgical intelligence, that addition of the automation, we're able to augment and essentially like improve surgeons' abilities so that they can deliver that care. And that's what hospitals want. That's what patients want. And I think the big players as well as the small players are seeing like that's the way we can get more product to market, because that cost of the R&D, that cost of the MPI to get into the market is so high for the single killer app robotic solutions.
And on that same token, so Stuart, you and I, we actually got together while I was at AAOS, and I came by your booth. And, we talked a lot about technology adoption. Technology adoption is, very dear to my heart. So what are some lessons that we can take from general surgery in terms of why the adoption isn't what it is? I think Adam Sachs yesterday showed a slide where only 3% of all procedures done worldwide are done robotically. So knowing that, what can we think about when it comes to adoption beyond just general surgery into other medical robotic areas?
Well, I'm going to answer the question from an orthopedic perspective because that's the perspective that I know and understand. We're now 15 years since Mako, performed its first surgery, or was used to perform the first surgery. And the killer app for Mako was the total knee, which was introduced in 2016. That was a procedure that's performed in high numbers where patient outcomes had a big opportunity to be improved. So that was the killer app that really took Mako and turned it into the thing that it is today. But 15 years after the introduction of Mako to the market, our estimates are that the market's about 12% penetrated. In other words, 88% of the market still hasn't adopted orthopedic robotic joint replacement. And why is that? I think there are two very important reasons for the challenge to get out of the innovator and early adopter community and into the mainstream orthopedic community. Number one is the size of these robots. These robots are 900-pound pieces of equipment. They're controlled by a camera system, which is on the other side of the operating room table. So 50-60% of the workspace for a surgeon is given over to the robotic system, and the surgeon and their assistants have to squeeze into a small space. It's very disruptive to their workflow. We're addressing that at Think because our product, which we're going to launch in the second quarter of this year, is £7, not £900. It's a £7 handheld robot, and I think that miniaturization of robotics, which performs the same functions and features as the larger robots, will help the majority start to embrace the technology. The second thing in orthopedics is the business model. The four major companies that control 90% of the joint replacement market all have robots now. They're all closed systems. If you use my robot, you can only use my implant. And that is challenging the customer who doesn't want to be forced into one particular brand of implant. And that conflict that's been created in the hospital executive environment is really limiting adoption. With Think, we've decided to go an open platform path to market. We are not an implant company. We will never become an implant company. We hope to become a ubiquitous technology platform that all implants and all implant manufacturers can put their products on. And I think that that will also accelerate. So I think the two biggest things in my experience are the size and disruptive nature of the current robots and the commercial model.
Fantastic. You know, piggybacking off of that, the concept of the workflow, and you know, I actually got to try. I wasn't excited about it at first, which is the robotic drill you guys had, but when I tried it out, it made a lot of sense because it fits into the workflow. Bruce, kind of a controversial question that is often asked is, assuming that you can replace a physician with a robot, the question is, should you, and if so, where?
Thanks for that question.
I'm sorry, man.
Yeah, I think the biggest fear surgeons have with anything that's automated, robotics, whatever, is the fact that you're going to try to replace me. And I think that's a generation or two away. Right now, the surgeons are looking for if you can make me faster, if you can make me better, if you can make me do things I can't do, I'm in. With general surgery, with surgeons in general, there's whether you like it or not, there's a bell curve. And the bell curve of surgeons is on the right side, you've got surgeons who are brand new, who haven't honed their skills yet, who haven't got their dexterity down, and they are now climbing that curve to where the majority of the surgeons are, where they're mostly in their peak and they're working day to day in their skill. And then on the left side, you've got the hands from God. Those are the guys that don't need robotics. So from a general robotics standpoint, what you're trying to do is flatten the curve and bring everybody to the left. So you want the early guys to be as good as the guys with 10 years experience. The 10-year experience plus want to be the guys with hands from God. And the hands from God, you'd think, well, I don't need robotics. I'm in my 50s or whatever. They're looking for career extension. So, because everybody ends up shaking, everybody ends up having some type of tremor, and that's what kills a lot of really great surgeons in the peak of their career. So whether it be in orthopedics or soft tissue or whatever. So one of the things that the robots in general do is eliminate tremor issues, increase accuracy, precision, and in some cases can help these surgeons, perform their jobs better, faster, quicker. And that's really the whole thing. So when surgeons look at our particular robot, we don't talk about automation. We don't talk about, we're going to replace you. We're talking about how we can assist you in your job of maybe if we can speed you up and you're doing 4 cases a day, if we can save 20%, you can add a 5th case. That is real. That's real money. That's real time stuff to these guys. And so there is a fear that, you act like if you're going to end up taking their job, we're a long ways away from that ever happening.
Yeah, and I think, as surgery has evolved, look, even me as a marketer, like my job has evolved with something like ChatGPT coming out, which is, you can fight it as much as you want, but at some point, at least in the world of medicine, there is this concept of, having a father as a surgeon, of the art of surgery, but people don't want, art anymore. They want science, and that's what they're paying for. Greg, you have a very interesting background in the sense that some people spend some time in academia and then they go into industry. Some people spend some time in industry and go into academia and then go back into industry. You've had a foot in both of those industries, academia and private, for a long time now. What are some things that you're seeing, and what kind of gets you excited in terms of what the future can, look like when it comes to medical robotics beyond just general surgery?
No, thanks a lot. Very good question. And at first, I'd just like to make an appeal to folks here to really try to understand what's going on in the academic setting, because there's a lot of really, really interesting work. If you go to these academic conferences, medical robotics conferences, image-guided surgical intervention conferences, there's so much interesting work, but it's really unfortunate. They can take 10, 20 years before these technologies get out. So if you actually think of Galen, Think, AIM, we actually share a lot of common ancestry. They all came out of essentially the same labs at Johns Hopkins, effectively, right? So these things now, 10, 20 years later, are finally getting to the market. So I think it's really, really important to start supporting these technologies. I see there's a huge push towards more compact devices, as we talked about before, application-specific devices that we can bring into the OR. They don't take up a lot of space. You can wheel them in, you can wheel them out. You can use them potentially for multiple different procedures or not necessarily tied into the same vendor's instrumentation. There's going to be a lot of work on how can we close that feedback loop. How can we use interventional imaging? AIM's focused on MRI, but it's not just going to be that. There's going to be more interventional ultrasound, more interventional imaging using camera-based systems with intelligence in it, right? How can we use real-time imaging and real-time feedback to guarantee you perform the procedure you wanted to perform that procedure? And then obviously there's this automation task we've been talking about before. But I think there's a huge spectrum of automation. A lot of people are like, are we going to automate this procedure or not? There's a huge, huge spectrum there, and it's all about how can we provide the level of assistance that's needed for the surgeon at this particular case. So what are robots good at? What are surgeons good at? How can we provide cooperative systems that help with those particular tasks? Right? So that's really what I would think is the key areas where there's going to be huge changes coming.
Absolutely. See, with this panel, we all kind of talked about these questions. So for the rest of the time, now it's kind of like I get to have some fun because I have no idea what I'm going to ask. It's really based on what I'm in the mood for. But, I want to start with one interesting thing. So earlier there was a great panel moderated by Henry Peck with Dr. Fred Mall and Daniel Hawkins about robotic surgery. And I was speaking to Daniel after the talk, and he made a good point about digital ecosystems. So if you think about Intuitive Surgical is not a robotic company. It's an ecosystem. And so if you're in the world of general surgery, either you're going to develop something that's going to be added into that ecosystem, or it's going to completely replace it. So knowing that, and again, I'm going to leave it open to the panel, so whoever wants to jump in. If you're building a medical robotics company outside of general surgery, how does that influence the business model and the scientific model that you build for the company that you want to go to, whether it's in primary care or anything else? Don't all go at once.
I can jump in there a little bit. I mean, when I was at J&J, we're working on VELUS. We thought about this question, the ecosystem, quite a bit, and we'd call it like the bookends of care. Like, what are you doing pre and post? How do we connect it all the way through? One thing we found as we developed the knee robotic solution and working very closely with surgeons, we're focusing, really so deeply on the procedure and, the need to be as seamless and fit into their workflow as possible. What we found is we added in balancing of the soft tissues and knees, which is something that's really done by feel. Sometimes some little knee tensioning devices when you're doing a manual procedure. We digitize that in the OR. But I think where that actually became really interesting is we started to look at pre and post, so that continuum of care, that ecosystem with, how can we have apps or tools that the surgeons can use so that they know when they go into that procedure really what they're trying to do for the patient. In my role at Haventure, we have 7 robotic startups across the orthopedic space, most of them looking at lower volume procedures, but procedures that have a high potential for growth. They're either difficult to access or the procedure itself is really difficult. And one of the questions that's coming up is really that continuum. Like, they need to understand how the patient either want it to be moving, behaving, what their health should be like in a normal, healthy state, and how that gets fixed in that interoperative space with the robot.
Oh, go ahead.
So I think you're absolutely right about the position that Intuitive hold and how you describe what they are as a company. They're more than just a robotics company. The question that I wrestle with is whether customers, and I'm thinking about hospitals and hospital systems at the moment, whether they think holistically or whether they think by service line. My experience thus far has been that they're more service line oriented. So I think the general surgery service line is dominated by that ecosystem that was built by Intuitive. When I think about the orthopedic service line, I don't think anybody is anywhere close. And I think the commercial model where you've got a robot and an implant tied together prevents any of the big major companies from establishing that standard for ecosystem. And, you know, I think that that's an opportunity that my company should be focused on, given our approach to the market. But I think it's a great question because the robots themselves can be built by great innovators, engineers, and scientists. But the commercial model is the really hard bit to do. But when you do it right, it becomes such a huge barrier to competition.
Yeah, I could add something too.
There's also there's a way to look at this in a it's very similar to what's been said. We look at the robot as an industry, or as our robot as a platform. I'm a crossover CEO. Half my career was in high tech. I did SaaS. I did everything else, and so there's a lot of similarity. And so I keep saying it's deja vu all over again from where the hardware and software business came in Silicon Valley to where we are today. And you know, my lesson was in the 90s, we went up against Cisco. And the biggest thing that John Chambers said is Cisco is a software company that happens to sell a router. And so when I look at Galen, we are a software company that happens to sell a robot. It's the software that becomes the ecosystem, becomes the platform where you don't want to constantly be changing your hardware per indication or per surgery or whatever. You want to have a standard platform, and what changes.
Oh, now they're back.
There we go.
I didn't like that answer.
I was like, man, Bruce, you got the whole panel canceled, man. Come on. So Prentice, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll go back to the whole process as well when we talk about, you know, outside, whether you call it general surgery or surgery as well. I mean, even today, while, you know, as big as Intuitive is, they still have the inputs handed to them. They're not upstream. They're not in the diagnostic realm. So they're still beholden to those who are getting diagnosed and then come to them for the intervention and the surgeons. So you have, you know, what you'll see now outside of that realm is you have some of these diagnostic companies and the big players, you know, like Siemens and so forth, that have the ability to act before that point. So you'll see robotics in the interventional space, in the diagnostic space, where they're helping with the biopsy for a prostatectomy, whether you should have one or not. But then you're already there, and maybe at that point you immediately can interact and fix, instead of going back and then having to wait for a surgery to come. So I think you'll start to see that merger of diagnostics and intervention happen with the same equipment. So you asked, you know, as somebody comes forward, if you have a diagnostic device or a diagnostic type robot intervention, does it have the ability to immediately be switched into treatment at that point? And then additionally, are you looking at, you know, the problems in healthcare as well? You know, you got cost, quality, access. Access is a big one, and where you can get these technologies, and how fast can you get to the technology? If you look at the genesis of Intuitive way back, it's DARPA. It was trying to get a combat wounded soldier fixed on the battlefield and not having to bring them back and losing time in that golden hour to get to a surgeon who has to be safe in the back to do it. It didn't work out that way. We didn't have the bandwidth. We didn't have the robustness of the product at the time, but it ends up becoming feasible now. So you heard, we talked about, you know, there's been talk about stroke. Stroke, you know, time is brain. So are there robotic systems that would expand our stroke center so it's not centrally located in an urban center? You can actually have maybe a expert in a console in a control room who can then be doing many different procedures during the day out in the community where it's important and time matters. So I think you have to take a look at that from here. Are you expanding the access and bringing forth your technology to more patients? So that helps the healthcare system, instead of continuing with this old model of everything central in the big house in the OR.
You know, Oh, sorry, go ahead, Greg.
No, I just wanted to pull it back to this platform technology that we were talking about before, and I think there's just a huge opportunity for having systems that can be used in different disciplines with different types of procedures. So, for example, having a base platform on the hardware, I know you talked about the software, but on the hardware as well, that you can readily add for this clinical application, without having the new learning curve, without necessarily having to go through all the new training and getting its system set up. So like when I talk about our system, you know, we have a robot for doing neurosurgery. What I don't tell you is that in the lab, we also have a robot that does prostate applications that uses the exact same robot controller, same cable, same sensors, same actuators, 90% of the same software. And I think that's where you could go, of having very easy to add on different types of robots for different types of clinical applications, and you can really get more for your money, if you will, as far as the hospitals are concerned with these platforms.
Yeah, just a watch out from an innovator or investor perspective. I've seen too many attempts to do that, to expand indications to the limits or beyond the limits of what the device is capable of, and you end up with difficult, challenging solutions rather than elegant solutions. So as long as the technology is capable of creating value in the procedure that you're expanding into, I would agree, but I've seen too many people step over that line.
Absolutely. I mean, no offense to the people in pharma, but med device is not pharma, and I feel the same frustrations where a technology, and it puts a lot of pressure on the R&D team to push the indications beyond what it's supposed to, and that's when you end up having a lot of issues happen. So kind of a controversial question that's always been brought up is around data, right? So if you go back 10, 15 years ago, before we had all this consolidation, at least here in the United States with health systems, you know, you can go and leverage yourself into certain hospitals and regional hospitals and everything. You know, they weren't very savvy, and so they would sign agreements, and the company would own the data, and you collect a lot of the data, and you sit on it, and it makes your company valuation go up. Can't do that anymore, especially these hospitals, they're owned by larger health systems. So my question to you is, imagine that you have a medical robotic company that comes out, has some automation, collects data. Who owns that data, and why? Don't all go at once.
You know, so this is a really interesting...
They're never going to get on a panel again with me.
No, it's a really interesting question. Because there's an element to it of, there's several parties who own the data, right? You know, the patient certainly has a right to their own data. The hospital or the center where they were cared for is also going to claim like they have a right to that data. And the surgeon may claim, you know, they have a right to the data too. And then I guess you could also add the device the data was collected on. Certainly to some extent has a right to the data as long as they're, you know, caring for it appropriately with HIPAA. You know, my answer to that question is the data has to be shared. We can't say definitely one of those four parties only owns the data. I think there'd probably be legal challenges to say the patient doesn't have a right to their own data. But yet, what's the patient, besides on a personal level, really going to do with their data? Unless they're a data scientist, they can't really make far-reaching changes or affect care. And that's where those other three parties start to come in. And I think where we can see the most from data is if those three parties start to agree that it's shared. Now, the problem is it's worth a lot of money, right? So each one has an advantage or has a reason to want to say they want to own it and they want to own it all.
So I'd like to put a different spin on that even if you have the data, what can you do with it? And one of the reasons it's really, really useful is can we start doing things like learning how procedures are done, making them be better, adding automation. And by automation, I don't mean, you know, press a button and do a procedure, but doing task automation or subtask automation, right? So I think there really needs to be an effort to try to do standardization. And again, this gets back to your asking about the industry and academia. You know, there's a lot of actually funding and initiatives to try to have, you know, open data collection standards and standardize what is actually collected by surgical robots. Because at the end of the day, if we're not collecting it the same way, we're not collecting the same types of points, right? What are we actually able to do with it? So I think it's really important to start thinking about what do we want to do with this data and how can we standardize that?
Yeah, who wants to own the data? Everyone. Who actually owns the data? That depends on each individual contract negotiation, which is the reality that we're in at the moment. But I do agree with what Addie was saying. The best eventual solution is an agreement where everybody has an access rights to the data, but maybe different views of the same data, depending on what purpose or need the data fulfills for them. But it's a long way off. You know, that's probably the single biggest negotiating point in a conversation when you're putting a robotic system into a hospital system in the US right now. And it's no easier in Europe or any other parts of the world.
Right, yeah, it's the thickest part of the contract to get through if you're going to say there's any level of data that is stored on your system, especially if that data is going to be passed outside the hospital.
You know, when we think about medical robotics, again, beyond general surgery, what we've all gotten used to over the decades is this, in my opinion, a very outdated business model, sorry everybody, of the razor blade, right? You sell the robot to sell more disposables, right, or implants or something. But if you go outside of surgery, right, you have a lot of cases where you don't really have too many disposable or implants. Is there a case where this is the opportunity where you feel that there's going to be some innovation on the business model side in terms of, let's say, a SaaS service or something else? So in terms of, let's say, a medical robotic company, let's just say in the primary care setting, there's no implants involved. What can be added to that business model to help that company grow its revenue and obviously invest more in itself?
No, you go ahead.
Yeah.
SaaS background.
Yeah. I applied. I crossed over my SaaS background into Galen. So we're going to launch as a digital surgery as a service model. We actually are going to be placing the robots in the hospital, charging a usage fee, and charging a disposable fee. Both are covered under reimbursement codes. We made sure the cost of the robot was to our favor, where we weren't losing our shirt. At the same time, we're looking for a guaranteed number of cases back from the hospital. And that, we estimate, cuts almost 3 months, 4 months out of the sales cycle, dealing with the VAC committees. Because if you're going to come in with a heavy $500,000 plus robot, you're going to go through committee and you're going to go through the grind on that, and that can be anywhere from 6 months to 12 months. So our idea was to at least get the first 1.0 Galens out there, get the surgeons using it, and then at the same time start adding applications or apps similar to an app store on your iPhone, where if they wanted navigation, they wanted AR, they wanted VR, we can then add those as a service to the computer in the robot, and eventually, if they want it, they can customize whatever they want for the case. And so that's the idea of getting robots out there. The problem with a lot of the robots where they're at today, they're all in the big teaching hospitals. What the ASCs, the surgical centers owned by 4 surgeons, they're not going to go pop $1 million, $800,000 for a robot, but that's where the volume is. So you want to hit the ASCs, you want to hit the community hospitals, you want to hit those kind of places where surgeries are being done. And so we're targeting. We know we're going to get the teaching hospitals. That's a given. It's the secondary hospitals and the ASCs where a lot of the volume is done, and this is where that model is pinpointed at that target. And so that's the whole premise of how to get these things out quickly and at the same time safely.
I'll add a piece there, just having worked in SaaS industries, having worked across robotics in different industries. I think, and when you look at digital revolutions, they all eventually put value and monetize on a SaaS sort of model, whether it's a fee per case, whether it's a licensing fee. You have to add value, you have to attribute value to the software, and when that is done in an industry, you suddenly see software take off. When software takes off, you start to see the limits of where the lack of limits of where the software can go in terms of really driving everything forward. The iPhone is like an overused model, but you see like the way that apps work in the iPhone perspective, you go to almost any other industry and the same sort of thing has happened when you start charging for the software as a service. It's a recurrent fee. You start to see more innovation in that industry, and then the software just go crazy in terms of what it's able to do.
So we're going to have a go at disrupting that razor blade model, and I'll come back in a year or maybe 2 years and let you know how we get on. But baby steps, I think ultimately the sort of SaaS type of model is where you end up. But I don't know whether in the industry that I'm competing in, whether we can jump straight to that, or whether we need to take the first step, which is just disrupt the razor blade model which exists today.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be baby steps. I mean, you would just shock the whole medical industry if you suddenly turn this on its head. But you have to take baby steps to get there, because some of the existing models today, I mean, they've done fantastically. They've made a ton of money. They've gotten robotics into the hospital, into the procedures, improved care. They're also starting to be challenged from a payment perspective. So figuring out other ways to get these technologies to continue to expand that care, I think, is where SaaS is going to start to creep its way in, and then we'll see what it really does.
Yeah, and we'll go with a subscription model as well. We'd have to make a razor blade to do it. And it's like that. There was even, we have patient attachments. I'm like, I don't want to have patient attachments that get thrown away every time just so I can have a razor blade. So you have to think about those things. But then you have to build in your, from a subscription as well, you're looking at what are the needs of the healthcare system, the economics of it. What is the CFO of, whether it's the CFO of an ASC, which is usually the doctor who owns it, or the CFO of the hospital, what are they really looking at? What are the pain points? And you're going to see a different medical robots affecting that. So outside of surgery, upstream, from like diagnostic robotics trying to help with the ER triage. You have logistic robots. They've been in the pharmacy for a long time, helping with the labor in there. You have Diligent Robotics out of Austin, who's trying to do the logistics in the hallways, not having one person be a runner. Why does this matter? It's not taking jobs. I mean, there's a labor shortage. There's an issue there. So can you bring forth, in your subscription, some way to prove out that you're helping them with that labor? That's the arduous task of the administrator or the CFO, is how do I run this entity with stress on labor? And if you're relying on the labor, then that's going to be a rate limiting factor for you. So how can you force multiply? And that's where robotics can come in. And that's what I mean. You move upstream from the actual intervention. You move downstream. You look around the whole ecosystem of where that intervention happens. How do you make that more efficient?
Yeah, sorry. At iRobot, we used to say robots should be anywhere where things are dull, dirty, or dangerous, because that is generally where humans don't want to be.
Yeah, and I think one of the truths that is often overlooked at the moment is that robotic surgery costs more per procedure in the vast, if not all, cases. And the industry has had a hall pass for the last decade or more because it's got this sort of cachet about it. Everybody wants to do it. And there's this sort of inner belief that it must be good, right? And there's a focus on better clinical outcomes, but not the overall health economics and the cost-benefit analysis. I think over the next 10 years, there's going to be much more focus on robotics actually reducing episode costs, not just relying on better clinical outcomes to justify their existence.
Do you think that's a good case set for the next, let's say 10 years we'll see some innovation obviously on the technology side, but do you feel that this is the time where we're going to be forced to see more innovation on the business model side because of that?
Yeah, I think the focus on the continuum of care needs to become far more sophisticated. It's mostly about engagement and workflow right now. It needs to become around the total cost of care across the continuum. And I do think that it's going to be a big topic for discussion in the years ahead. And we're ready for it. We're partnering with a company called Definition Health, who are going to be presenting later on today. Very interesting company out of the UK, which if you have a chance, I would sit in their presentation this afternoon.
I can just chime in on that a little bit, because there seems to be this misconception that robotics are either going to add cost and or add time to the procedures. And honestly, I really think these ones that are going to be coming down the pipe over the next several years, it's all going to be about how can we streamline that workflow? How can we reduce the costs? How can we reduce recurrence rates? How can we take steps out of that procedure to make it run faster, make it run more reliably? So I really think all these robots that are coming down, it's really going to be about how can we reduce that cost and get better outcomes.
Yeah, and I'm happy you mentioned that. I feel that even 10 years ago, a lot of the innovations we see, robotics or not, were more focused on just radical disruption and not being empathetic towards like the people who are actually using the technology and how does this fit into their current workflow. And the nice thing I've seen with everybody's, at least everybody's on this panel's company, is this empathetic approach of how do we innovate that fits into the workflow and either reduces steps and make it easier versus making people do radical changes, because that part of the procedure is like one of many things that the people are doing with. So with the remaining time, with each panelist, tell me one thing that you're very excited about when it comes to the future and, with regards to the things that you've seen at LSI. So Greg, we'll start off with you.
Sure. As I said, I'm just really excited about using imaging to guide procedures. It's all about being an engineer, I think about like closed loop interventions, right? How can we actually make sure you do what you want to do?
I'm looking forward to telling my kids that I was on a panel with the great Omar.
There you go.
You win best
Follow
panelist.
that one up. I'm looking forward to telling my kids I was on the
Gets
great
the
panel.
fruit basket.
No, okay. No, I think, again, back to the closed loop thing, but that data perspective in AI, and I'm really excited to see where procedures start to advance, and we start to see an improvement to patient care, to outcomes, to that whole episode of care because of the technology that we're bringing in to the medical space.
Not to give too many things away, but we're really excited. We're actually very enthused of what's coming out of the research lab. Of course, we're affiliated with Hopkins, and the whole idea of where AI is taking robotics. So you're going to see. Look at ChatGPT. I mean, my God, it all of a sudden just took off in the last 3 months out of nowhere, and so you're going to see, I think, more intelligent software now start to help these surgeons, either a feedback loop or whatever in real time, which I think will have a greater impact on outcomes.
Yeah, I'm excited. As I said, data to help optimize the process. Lift the veil on a lot of things and get to the truth so that you can iterate and get better. And I think we've been hiding a lot of that. It needs to come forth, and that's why everybody should own the data. We should aggregate it, and we should take a look at it, and then that will lead to better decision support. This thing of the hands of God, or you need to have a person in the room. Why is that? You might not actually. If you've done enough N sample size and proved it out enough, you can automate certain things, and that will be for the betterment of all.
Well, thank you all. Please give a warm applause to the panel. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.